happened not too long ago, and I really just love this guy's lights coming on. And so I was working with this guy, and he had been in the Marines for about 18 years. And he had just gotten out. He just had a child, really, really nice guy. And he was working in the transportation industry. So, and he was just, when he came to me, you know, the guy was working like 80 hours a week. He was just completely just depleted of all his energy, just a really hardworking guy. He's like, you know, bummed out because he can't spend any time with his family. And on the days that he has off, he's so exhausted that he didn't have time to job search, let alone even be there with his family. He just wanted to sleep. And I'm like, yeah, I totally get that. So what he wanted to do was be a project manager. And it was the same thing, because he felt so insecure, because he's like, well, you know, honestly, Scott, I was in the Marines for 18 years. And so I don't feel like I could do the job of a project manager, but that's what I want to do. So I was like, okay. I'm like, well, let's back up for a second. Why do you want to be a project manager? And so he started telling me, and, you know, as things unfolded really quickly, I was like, okay. And so what were you doing when you were in the Marines for 18 years? He's like, well, I was doing, you know, I was basically managing teams of 8 to 15 people or whatever. And I was making sure that, you know, whatever mission we had, that there was like, we were in 100% compliance or whatever, and we would use the best resources we had while spending the least amount of money. And he kept talking about it. I'm like, Ruben, not like project management to me. And he's just like, well, yeah. And I'm like, how long did you do that for in the you know, when you're in the Marines? He's like, pretty much the whole time. I was like, well, tell me more about that. Is there anything that, you know, why you feel like you were good at that? Why did they ask you to do that? He's like, well, actually, come to think of it, you know, I got promoted over the senior officers as a junior officer. And I was just like, wow. I was like, well, you know, why? And, you know, he told me like, well, because X, Y, and Z, and because I had these things that I did for them. And, you know, all signs are pointing to the fact that this guy was a freaking phenomenal project manager, and he had gotten promoted a ton of times in the Marines. And, you know, I was like, do people normally get promoted over senior officers in the Marines when they're a junior officer? He's like, no, really, they really don't. It was actually pretty incredible. And so I was like, well, man, if, you know, you obviously have a natural gift at what you did, and you have, you know, we were able to figure out like, well, how long did you do that for? 15 years. So you have 15 years of project management. It was just in a different setting. So, you know, the example I would use with him was like, because we